Hey, what's going on YouTube? Welcome to another Season 7 League of Legends Champion Guide. Today I'm going to be covering Nocturne, the Eternal Nightmare.
Embrace the darkness.
Alright, let's begin our guide by looking at Nocturne's pros and cons. So first up would be Nocturne's fast jungle clear. He has some pretty good AoE damage from his Q and his passive, and in the jungle, he can clear it pretty quickly. He's got some of the best high early game damage out there, and he's got amazing ganks post level 6. This of course is due to his fantastic ultimate and his high burst damage. Now Darkness, which also comes from his ultimate, is pretty great in solo queue. The enemy won't be able to see their allies, and usually people are going to be panicking thinking they're going to get ulted by Nocturne. Then finally of course is Nocturne's spell shield. Even though Nocturne usually goes for a high damage build and he's relatively squishy, if he can block the right spells, he's pretty durable. Now Nocturne however has no dash besides his ultimate. This of course means when he is trying to pick people off and he is trying to gank, he is very reliant on having that ultimate. Now Nocturne of course because of this also has some pretty weak ganks pre-level 6, but usually we're going to rush level 6 as quick as possible so we can start having those great ganks. Nocturne's also a really mana hungry champion, so he really relies on getting that blue buff, and he's a bad team fighter as well. His ganks and his pick potential are some of the best ones out there, but in a straight 5v5 team fight, he's not the best champion by a long shot. Regardless, in the right situations, Nocturne is one of the best champions out there. For my masteries, I like to go 18 Cunning and 12 Ferocity, grabbing Thunderlord's Decree as my keystone mastery. Nocturne's a champion that relies on bursting people down pretty much instantly, and Thunderlord's Decree is going to help you a lot. When you're going for a gank, just your ultimate, Q, and an auto attack will proc Thunderlord's Decree, and you're going to do a massive amount of damage in a very little time span. For the rest of your masteries, you pretty much just want to focus on increasing your damage as much as possible. If you were going for an attack speed heavy build that had something like a Blood Razor and a Blade of the Ruined King, then you also have the option of going for Fervor of Battle. It's pretty decent in that specific scenario, but usually I just go for Thunderlords. For my runes, I like to go for attack damage reds, armor yellows, either attack speed or magic resist blues, and attack speed quints. Even though I usually go for a lethality build on Nocturne, I prefer the attack damage and the attack speed because of the jungle clear. Your passive's cooldown is also lowered on your auto attack, so having this attack speed will of course allow you to do it more often. Since I am in the jungle, I'll usually get the attack speed glyphs just to help with the clear even more, but if you are against a very AP heavy team, then you may want the magic resist instead. For your summoner spells, you want to go for Flash and Smite. Flash is a requirement on Nocturne since the only dash in his kit is from the Paranoia, and it's a very long cooldown early on in the game. It can also be used to save your life throughout the game since you're generally going to be a pretty damn squishy champion. Finally, you of course also have the option of using this to close a gap on the enemy and use your Unspeakable Horror to flee the enemy, allowing you to kill them. Smite is also required since it will allow you to clear through the jungle, secure objectives like Dragon and Baron, and buy your jungler item. Now let's kick off your abilities by looking at your passive Umbra Blades, which is great for its AoE damage and its healing. Nocturne's basic attack is periodically enhanced, dealing 120% AD physical damage to his target and surrounding enemies, and healing himself for between 10 and 26, plus 15% AP per enemy hit. Basic attacks reduce Umbra Blade's cooldown by 1 second. So this here is a really solid passive because not only does it do more damage, but it does it in an AoE, and it even heals you. That means of course it's fantastic for clearing through the jungle, and when you are going for a gank, your first auto will do bonus damage, making your gank even more effective. With the recent lethality changes, I'll pretty much always go for a lethality build, but it's also viable to go for Blood Razor and Blade of the Ruined King, and that type of item build really uses his passive effectively, and it's great against tanky teams. Your Q ability is Duskbringer, and this does some really solid damage in a line, and also gives Nocturne bonus movement speed and bonus attack damage while on the path. When activated, Nocturne sends out a Shadow Blade in a line that leaves a dust trail on its path, dealing physical damage to enemies it passes through, and causes enemy champions hit to also leave a dust trail behind their movement for 5 seconds. While on the dust trail, Nocturne is ghosted and gains bonus movement speed and bonus attack damage. So this is your bread and butter ability because it is your main source of damage outside of your auto attacks, and therefore we max it first. When you're going for a gank and you're in your ultimate, you also want to use this ability before you actually land at the enemy champion, so you instantly do a bunch of burst damage and cancel the animation. This will also make the ability much easier to land since you will see the line moving towards the target. Of course, it's also going to be great because you're going to have bonus movement speed when you are chasing the target, and bonus attack damage, making your gank very effective. It's really important to land this ability. Now it does also have a 1200 range, so this ability actually gives Nocturne a form of damage from ranged. I've even sniped countless people with this ability. It's easily the best one on Nocturne. Your W is Shroud of Darkness, and this is your spell shield that also gives you some bonus attack speed. Passively, Nocturne empowers his blades, permanently gaining bonus attack speed. When activated, Nocturne creates a barrier that blocks the next enemy ability that hits him within the next 1.5 seconds. If Nocturne blocks an ability, Shroud of Darkness's bonus attack speed is doubled for 5 seconds, and this can be up to 80%. So as I mentioned on the pros and cons page, this is a very strong ability, and if you can block the right spells, you are a pretty durable champion. Not only did you not take damage from the spell, but you're going to be rewarded with a bunch of extra attack speed, and it will really increase your damage output. The downside here is that it does only last 1.5 seconds, so it has the chance to do nothing, but a well-timed shield can save your life over and over again. Your E ability is Unspeakable Horror, and this is your crowd control ability that also does some pretty decent damage. Passively, Nocturne gains 335 bonus movement speed when moving towards a fleeing target. When activated, Nocturne plants nightmares into the target's mind, dealing magic damage over 2 seconds and forming a tether between him and his target. If the target does not break the tether by moving out of range, they flee from Nocturne for a short duration. So this of course will kick in that bonus movement speed from his passive, and he's going to be very mobile during that duration. It's also worth noting that it does work with other champions' fleas as well, things like Hecarim's ultimate, Fiddlesticks' fear, or Shaco's Jack in the Boxes. Now this does also have a scaling fear duration, so I do like to max this ability second over the W. The W ability is also really solid because it does have scaling attack speed, but this one in my opinion is just a little bit better. To use this ability, all you have to do is close a gap on a target, activate this ability and stay in range for 2 seconds so they flee, and then follow up with a bunch of autos. Your ultimate is Paranoia, and this is your really solid gap closer that also does a ton of damage. When activated, Nocturne applies Nearsight to all enemy champions for 4 seconds. This part is global. While Paranoia is active, Nocturne can activate it again to dash to the target enemy champion, dealing them physical damage, which is on a 120% bonus AD ratio. This also has between a 2,500 and 4,000 range, so it can be used from a really long distance as well. This ability does unfortunately have a pretty long cooldown, but it's one of the best ultimates out there for ganking, so you need to be using it whenever it's off cooldown pretty much. Look for a target by themselves and then jump onto them with this ability, land your Q, and then follow up with some autos. The darkness part of this ability is also pretty strong. The enemy team will all have Nearsight, so they're not going to be able to see their allies, and usually people are going to start panicking thinking Nocturne is about to jump on top of them. Your team can use this time frame to jump onto the enemy team, and they're not really going to have the time to react and help their allies. For your skill order, you first want to put a point into your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11, and 16. You'll then want to max your Q ability first because it is your main source of damage outside of your autos and your ultimate, and the movement speed and attack damage that it does give you when on the path makes your ganks much more effective. We'll then want to max your E ability second. It has a scaling flee duration, and it does some pretty decent damage as well in the early game, so as long as you can get off your flee, your ganks are going to be pretty effective. Now that of course means we max our W ability last. Even though it does have a scaling attack speed, it's just not as strong as our Q and our E. You do however want to take an early point at level 2, so if a spell is coming in towards you, you can block it and gain a bunch of attack speed. For your all-in combo, you first want to start by activating your ultimate and then jumping onto the enemy. Just before you land, make sure you cast your Q mid-air and auto-attack so both hit at the same time. If the enemy still has a lot of hit points, you can put your E on them and start auto-attacking, but as you can see in this scenario, you completely delete the Varus. Nocturne's really strong at clearing through the jungle, and therefore has a couple viable routes. The first one would be the standard clear, where you kill the first buff with a leash from your bot lane, and then you kill the wolves, raptors, and your second buff. Now the second one here is my favorite one, and it's the one I'm actually showing in the gameplay. This is the raptor start, and it is the fastest way to rush level 6 and have your double buffs, and you'll hit it by about 6 minutes. Start by killing your raptors, and then do Krugs, Wolves, Gromp, and Scuttle, then you want to back, buy, and then do another full clear. As I said, this is a really quick way to hit level 6 and have both buffs when you gank, but the downside is if you are against an invading jungler, you're very susceptible to them taking your blue or red, so if you are against something like a Shaco or a Shyvana, you may not want to go for this start. Instead, against those invading junglers, I would do the third option, which is the level 3 rush and gank. This is where you do your first buff with a leash from your bot lane, and then do your wolves, and then your second buff. This is the quickest way to get both buffs and still hit level 3, and makes your ganks pretty decent since you will have every ability in your kit. As I said, the second option is my favorite because I like rushing 6 as soon as possible for that ultimate, but the others are great as well. When ganking before level 6, try to come from behind the enemy and hit them with your Duskbringer. Use the movement speed this ability gives you to get on top of the enemy and then apply your Unspeakable Horror. Keep in mind that you can use your Shroud of Darkness to block a spell so you don't get crowd controlled while you are trying to get on top of the enemy. Post level 6, ganking gets a lot easier, and you want to open up with your Paranoia to get on top of the enemy. Just before you get there, you want to use your Duskbringer while you're still flying to the enemy so it hits them when you land and does a massive amount of burst damage. At this point, I like to quickly smite the enemy and auto-attack them. If the enemy still happens to be alive, you can use your Unspeakable Horror to flee them and then finish them off with some auto-attacks. If possible though, try to hold onto your Unspeakable Horror in case there is a second target. Nocturne is a fairly weak team fighter, but there is a couple things you can do to set yourself up for success. The first thing you'll want to do is look for an isolated target. If you can find a target by themselves, you should have more than enough time to delete them if they are a squishy target before people react because of the paranoia. If you need to jump into a full fight, then you want to try to wait until defensives like Exhaust and Zonias are down. Since you're not the best team fighter out there, it's pretty important that you try to delete somebody with your paranoia. If you feel like you can't dive into the backline because you're just going to die instantly, you always have the option of fighting on the front line as well. It's better to be doing at least some damage than none at all because you're just dead. Now let's look at some of your hard matchups, and first up surprisingly is Cho'Gath. After his changes, he's actually pretty decent. Cho'Gath is one of those champions that when he gets a couple items, your chances of 1v1ing him basically are non-existent. You want to try to keep wards around the map and keep track of his movement and gank lanes that he's nowhere near. His counter ganks are not the best, but they are pretty decent, so make sure he's not near whenever you ultimate a target. Next up I've got Ivern, who's a very annoying counter jungling champion that's going to pretty much tilt you in the game. His counter ganks are also crazy good, so try to keep track of him. If he comes in after you ultimate, he can easily save his teammates. His team fighting is also pretty much 5,000 times better than yours, so try to avoid team fights and try to pick people off when he's not near them. You do have a chance of 1v1ing him early on if you can spell shield his root collar, so try to do that and snowball it. Another counter jungler that's going to be very annoying for you is Nunu. This little shithead's going to be entering your jungle over and over again, mowing down on your jungle camps, so try to ward your jungle and keep eyes on him. He's also definitely susceptible to your counter gank, so try to counter gank him whenever you're nearby with your ultimate. In teamfights, his damage output is not that high and he's not that big of a deal, so avoid him and go on to other targets. And coming in at last is Rammus, who basically doesn't give a shit about assassins like you. He's going to rush an early Thornmail, get a bunch of other armor, taunt you, and watch you kill yourself while you do no damage at all. Now Rammus is actually a ridiculously strong counter ganker as well, so try to keep eyes on him. Don't let him roll into your lane after you ultimate a target. He will save them, you will die. If you get the opportunity early on, you can try to 1v1 him before he gets his Thornmail. Alright, now let's finish this guide by looking at your item build, which starts with a Hunter's Machete, refillable potion, and a warding totem. For your first buys, you have to choose between the Stalker's Blade and the Skirmisher's Saber, and you also have the Tiamat. I'll pretty much always go for the Stalker's Blade because I really like the blue smite, but the red smite is also very viable, and it's really solid in the Tank Shredder build. I'm also a Nocturne player that usually doesn't get the Tiamat. It is, however, really solid on Nocturne because it increases your burst damage after you use it after your ultimate and your auto attack, and both the Ravenous Hydra and the Titanic Hydra are pretty decent items on Nocturne. If you feel like getting either one of those items, make sure you get an early Tiamat. So for my core builds, I have the Assassin and the Tank Shredder. Other Nocturnes do exist like the Crit Nocturne and the very tanky Nocturne, but they're definitely inferior to these two types of Nocturnes. For the Assassin Nocturne, I get the Warrior Enchantment, Yumu's, and a Duskblade. This will give you a lot of attack damage right off the bat, some decent mobility from the Yumu's, and of course, a big chunk of lethality. If you're looking to one-shot squishy targets, this is the build for you. For the second core build, the Tank Shredder, we get the Blood Razor, Blade of the Ruined King, and a Black Cleaver. This will give you a lot of attack speed and some nice on-hit damage, but also give you the Black Cleaver to shred some armor. Of course, that attack speed is going to help you accomplish this a little bit quicker. If you're against a very tanky lineup, then this build is going to do an absolute ton of damage to those tanky champions, and they're not going to be much of a problem for you. Now for your boot options, you have the Merc Treads against high AP and CC, Ninja Tabbies against high AD teams, and Ionian Boots if you do want 10% more CDR. For the item pool, first coming in, of course, is the Edge of Night. This is a really solid way to add more lethality into the Assassin build, and that Spell Shield is going to give you a little bit more durability. When I'm going for Assassin Nocturne, which is pretty much all the time, I basically always pick up this item. Another really solid item though is the Guardian Angel. This item's another way to add a nice chunk of extra damage, yet have a really solid defensive. Since you will be diving into the enemy team, coming back to life if they do focus you is pretty awesome. Now since the Tiamat is pretty decent on Nocturne, of course you can get the Ravenous Hydra or the Titanic Hydra. If you want to prioritize damage, of course go for the Ravenous Hydra, but if you want to be a little bit more durable, go for the Titanic Hydra. If you're against some AP assassins, you could also go for the Maw. This yet again gives you a nice chunk of damage, which is great on an assassin, but also makes you a little bit more durable since you can get that spell shield when you do dip low. Speaking of durability, you could always go for the Dead Man's Plate or the Frozen Mallet. Both are going to give you a really nice health pool, but the Dead Man's Plate gives you some nice mobility and a bit of extra tankiness, and the Frozen Mallet is going to allow you to stick on targets for days. For the Assassin full build, you take that core, get some boots, and then an Edge of Night and a Guardian Angel. You're going to do an absolute ton of damage, and anybody that's squishy around you is going to pretty much explode. In situations where you make a mistake and you end up going in a bit too early, you always have the Guardian Angel to bring you back to life, so you can do some damage in the team fight. For the Tank Shredder full build, you take that core, pick up some boots, and then get a Dead Man's Plate and a Guardian Angel. You're going to be a little bit more durable because of the Dead Man's Plate and the Black Cleaver, but you're going to do a lot more damage to tanks since you do have the Blood Razor and the Blade of the Ruined King. Both of these builds are fantastic, and they're great in different situations. And that's all I've got for Nocturne. Don't forget to check out the video description below for a link to all of my social medias. I do also have a Discord server, so if you do need any additional help or you just want to hang out, then please feel free to join. We have a lot of people in there, and a lot of them love to help anybody who needs it. I also have a second Let's Play channel, so if you enjoy Let's Plays, please also check out my second channel. But other than that, thank you guys so much for checking out the video. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take it easy, and peace.